Hi, everyone, and welcome to Wellness Wednesday. It's Karla Coleman, your host, Director of Communications from New Salem Baptist Church in Columbus, Ohio. I hope everyone's doing well tonight. We have with us someone who's going to talk about, I would say, a topic that I had never heard of, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion today. But before we get started, I just want to thank you all for starting a little later for us today. I know 5:30 is not our normal time, but we just needed an extra 30 minutes. And then also next week, we're going to take the day off, and we'll be back the following Wednesday with an all new guest and topic. So watch the e-newsletter and Facebook Live, and we'll have more information about who will be our guest speaker, not next Wednesday, but the Wednesday after. So today we're going to talk about type 3, what she calls type 3 diabetes, which is interesting because it's more of type 2 diabetes and Alzheimer's disease and how it affects the other. So let me introduce Jeanae Shelby-Stevens. How are you, Jeanae?
Hi, I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you doing today?
Oh, good, good. Glad to have you on the show. So why don't
Thank
you
you so
tell
much
us
for
a little
having
bit of,
me.
absolutely. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I know you have a presentation to share with us that's going to talk about, like I said, a topic that I had not heard of. And, I know a little bit about diabetes and I know a little bit about Alzheimer's, but how one affects the other is I think is going to be an interesting discussion today. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm currently a dual degree MD PhD student at Wright State University. I have completed my first two years of my medical degree and my first 2 years of my PhD, and I'm now currently completing my thesis research before returning back to finish the last 2 years of my medical degree. And I'll go a little bit more into my background after I begin the presentation. But yeah, so this topic of it's quoted type 3 diabetes is interesting because really all it's looking at is, as you explained, like the link between type 2 diabetes and how we're seeing this increased risk of Alzheimer's disease in these patients, and looking at what mechanisms could possibly be responsible for that. And so that's what I do currently in my lab, is look at different cellular changes that occur in type 2 diabetes that could be possibly leading to cognitive dysfunction.
Excellent, excellent. So I know you have a PowerPoint to share with us. Everyone, just come on and into the chat, and if you have some initial questions, pop them in there. But I'm expecting that you'll have some questions along the way. So let's go ahead and get started with your presentation. Mike, thanks.
So, as I said before, I'll be talking today about what's coined type 3 diabetes. And we're going to be looking at the emerging evidence that shows there could be a link between type 2 diabetes and Alzheimer's disease. So, this is a little bit about me. This is my family. I'm sure some of those faces look familiar to all my New Salem people. So, I got my Bachelor's of Science in Neuroscience from The Ohio State University. And as I said before, I'm a dual degree MD PhD student, and my PhD is in biomedical sciences, and my medical degree will be from the Boone Shaw School of Medicine. And I'm currently starting my third year of my thesis research at Wright State. And future plans after graduation is all said and done and residency is also complete. I hope to be a physician scientist at a research hospital specializing in dementia and cognitive disorders.
Nice.
We can go to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so type 3 diabetes. So this graph is showing that when we take a look at patients who have type 2 diabetes and we compare them to patients who don't have type 2 diabetes, and right now we're looking at the parts that are in red. what we see is, regardless of age, across the whole span of the disease progression, there is a mild cognitive impairment. And this is in patients who never go on to develop dementia. This is just baseline cognitive impairment that's not considered severe enough for a diagnosis of, say, Alzheimer's. And then if we look in the blue, what we see is there's also an increased risk of developing dementia, and that patients with type 2 diabetes are developing dementia at an earlier age than patients without type 2 diabetes. And when you look at just the numbers of the increased risk, patients with type 2 diabetes, the risk is actually 1.73 times that of those without diabetes. So it's almost 2 times the risk. And so this is kind of the relationship that this research is focused on, finding out why is this the case? Why are we seeing this? You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So before we can understand the two diseases together, we'll look at the two diseases apart from each other. So we'll start with diabetes. So 2 in 5 Americans are expected to develop type 2 diabetes in their lifetime. And that's kind of for me, it was kind of an astonishing number to look at and see just how much the prevalence of diabetes has increased and continues to increase. And what I thought was even more shocking than that number was the next stat, that 1 in 5 Americans with diabetes don't know it. And that is something that really emphasizes the importance of going to get that yearly physical. Because when you're in the early stages of type 2 diabetes, you're not really going to be exhibiting most of the traditional signs and symptoms we usually associate with the disease. So it's so important for you to make sure you're going to your yearly physical, and encouraging all your family members to go to their yearly physicals, to have your primary care physician assess your blood sugar levels and assess how they're changing over time. And to kind of further emphasize this, more than 1 in 3 Americans have prediabetes. So this means their blood glucose levels are elevated, but not quite to the diagnosis of diabetes. And that is ideally where you'd want to catch an increase in blood sugar. Because when you're in prediabetes, before you're in full-blown diabetes, it's going to be much easier to treat with simple lifestyle modifications before you really have to go on a heavy medication regimen. So this is also important for us because diabetes, just in general, diabetes disproportionately affect Black Americans. So it's so important for us to make sure that we are getting ahead of this, and that we are encouraging our family members who like to only go to the doctor when they're sick. I know we all got some of them, but we got to make sure that we're encouraging our family members, and we're leading by example and doing so ourselves, to go and really get our yearly physicals and get blood work done to make sure we're staying on top of our health.
Excellent.
You can go to the next slide. So what are they going to look for when you go to that yearly physical that I know you're all going to go to now after this discussion? So they're going to be looking at your blood sugar levels and your A1C. So your A1C is looking at how your blood sugar levels are like over time. So when you just do a blood sugar test, it's just looking at your blood sugar right there in that moment. And usually what they're going to do is they're going to have you not eat. And so then they're going to be looking at your fasting blood sugar. And you might be wondering, why does an increase in blood sugar matter, or why is this something that they're looking at? So when your body is in a state where there's this abundance of glucose, which the increased sugar in your blood, that's when you start to see toxicity. And glucose is toxic to the majority of your cells, and you can start seeing in-organ damage from that. So that can happen in your kidneys, happens in your nervous system, which also ties into what we'll discuss later with the Alzheimer's disease. But then even further, you'll start to develop what's called insulin resistance. So usually when you have increased glucose, it signals to your body that it needs to release insulin. And insulin is what allows your cells to actually take up that glucose so that it can use it to make for energy. However, if the receptors on the cells for insulin are no longer able to recognize it, or the receptors get down-regulated because there's just so much insulin all of the time, it's going to start to kind of ignore that signal that, hey, we need to uptake glucose into that cell. And so that even though there seems to be this abundance of glucose, abundance of blood sugar, your brain won't be able to effectively take up that glucose and use it um, in order to produce energy. You can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So, what are some of these signs and symptoms of type 2 diabetes? So, increase in your urgency to urinate, increase in your thirst, losing weight without trying, increased hunger, blurry vision, numbness and tingling in your hands or feet, feeling very tired or lethargic, having dry skin, and slow wound healing, and more infections than usual. Now, we want to remember that we don't want to wait until we're getting these signs and symptoms to go to the physician, because this means that this elevated glucose state and this insulin resistance is now starting to cause end organ damage that's leading to these signs and symptoms. It's much better for you to just go get your yearly physical and to catch it before it's ever a problem. However, if you do notice these things in yourselves or in your family members, it's really important to discuss these with your doctor and to not just let them go until they get worse, because it could be a sign that something deeper is wrong. You go to the next slide. So moving over to Alzheimer's disease. So Alzheimer's disease is growing dramatically in prevalence. Over the past 20 years, the prevalence has increased 145%, which is it's really a lot to think about, and that prevalence is just continuing to increase. So 1 in 9 adults over 65 are currently living with Alzheimer's disease, and older Black Americans are actually twice as likely to have Alzheimer's than older white Americans. And so again, when we really need to be having this discussion with our family members and being honest with ourselves about when we're noticing cognitive changes and not just attributing them to, oh, we're getting older. Any cognitive change you want to discuss with your physician before attributing it to just getting older. Because just like with diabetes, we really want to be able to tackle these changes and tackle this cognitive dysfunction really early on in the disease progress. You can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So what are some of the cellular changes that are kind of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease? So what we see are accumulations of beta amyloid, and it's a protein that kind of gets all clumped up and hangs out around your cells. And once this plaque forms, that can cause what's called cytotoxicity. So it can cause your neurons to die. And we also get an accumulation of what's called tau. And tau accumulates inside of your neurons in tangles. And so if you look at A and B, these are both representation of those amyloid beta plaques. And then if you look at C, it's representation of the tau tangles. And so these different cellular changes can actually begin to be seen before clinical diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease is made, in the preclinical phase of Alzheimer's disease. And there's still conflicting ideas and studies about what the actual mechanism responsible for how the plaques and tangles lead to Alzheimer's disease progresses. But in every case of Alzheimer's disease, this is something that we're seeing, is this excess of beta amyloid, this production of the plaques, and then also the accumulation of the tau tangles.
Do you mind before you go on just explaining what Alzheimer's disease is?
Yeah. So take it back. Alzheimer's disease is actually, if we go to the next slide, it'll be easier.
Okay.
I've got yeah. So Alzheimer's disease is a neurodegenerative disorder that begins with cognitive dysfunction, and that if this cognitive dysfunction progressively worsens. And unfortunately, currently, there is no cure for Alzheimer's disease, but there's many research studies that are going on to try to find out how to prevent this progression. And then eventually the hopes is to be able to reverse this progression that we're seeing. So once you get this accumulation of these beta amyloid plaques and these tau tangles, Another thing that we often see is a decrease in brain volume. So these neurons are after these accumulations occur, these neurons are dying, and uh, so once we get those three things happening, then we start to see the cognitive decline. And these are the different phases of Alzheimer's disease. So it begins with preclinical Alzheimer's disease, or AD, and that's what I was saying before, where you'll start to see the earliest signs of the disease, but you're not going to start to see the memory loss quite yet. And then we'll move to mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's disease. And this is really a key phase that really takes some reflection and discussion with your family members to catch, because you'll begin to start to have cognitive impairments, but these cognitive impairments are not going to prevent you from being able to do your day-to-day activities. And if it's not something that you're actively paying attention to, it's a diagnosis that's really easy to miss, and it is often missed until full-on dementia has been diagnosed. And so once these cognitive impairments are so severe that they're affecting your ability to complete your everyday tasks, then you're officially diagnosed with dementia due to Alzheimer's disease, which then occurs in three phases. And so these cognitive deficits could be stuff like a dysfunction with your language and memory, spatial awareness. You might have someone who begins to forget family members that they've known for a long time. And this loss of memory begins with things that are really close in time, and it takes a long time to reach the things that happened to you longer ago. So a person might not remember a conversation that they had with you an hour ago, but they'll still remember, say, the name of their best friend when they who lived next door to them when they grew up. So, and then this memory loss progresses until eventually those memories are affected as well. Go to the next slide. So then the common features between the two that have really gained a lot of steam recently is this insulin resistance that I described with diabetes. So in Alzheimer's disease, we also see insulin resistance in the brain. And this link is so ingrained that actually a now used model of sporadic Alzheimer's disease, which is just Alzheimer's disease that's not due to a baseline genetic mutation. They take the same drug that they use to induce diabetes in rodents, and they inject that drug into your ventricles and into your cerebrospinal fluid to cause Alzheimer's disease. So that really highlights that this insulin resistance on its own is enough to cause Alzheimer's disease. And it's important to note that that doesn't mean that everyone who has type 2 diabetes is now going to have Alzheimer's disease. However, your risk is significantly increased because of the shared pathology. And it's thought that both the insulin resistance in both diseases could be caused by different inflammatory pathways. And this is due to like a loss of anti-inflammatory proteins, and also an increase of oxidative stress. So just cellular stress and reactive oxygen species. And so now what studies are doing is they're looking to see, okay, can we treat these two diseases in the same way then? And the short answer is maybe. So there currently are studies that are in clinical trials that are looking at the use of intranasal insulin to treat Alzheimer's disease that showed promise in animal trials. And same with metformin, which I'm sure anyone who has type 2 diabetes who's listening right now probably knows metformin. And there have been animal studies that have shown efficacy of metformin in improving cognitive function in Alzheimer's disease. But the thing to really remember with both of these conditions is early treatment is really everything. And there's even now FDA new drugs that have been FDA approved for Alzheimer's disease, but again, have only been studied in patients with mild cognitive impairment. And so there really is a lot of research left to be done to kind of figure out what specific pathway do we need to target, and how do we best approach treating these diseases. And especially because cognitive dysfunction is common between these two diseases, it would be ideal if there was a way to use one drug to treat both, because then that reduces the burden on caregivers, because you're reducing the amount of medications that they need to manage, reduces the burden on patient, because again, you're reducing the amount of medication that patient now has to take. And so this is really something that studies have been focusing on, is how do we target this brain insulin resistance and use that to our advantage and manipulate that in order to slow the progression of Alzheimer's disease, or reverse the damage that's in cells that have not died yet. If you go to the next slide for me, please. Thank you. And so this is the current, I guess, flow chart, if you will, for treating patients who have cognitive dysfunction and type 2 diabetes. And the thing I really, 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 really want to hit home is that it's not currently a baseline thing that if you have type 2 diabetes, you're screened for cognitive impairment. Even though it's very well known that this is a very common comorbidity, you are not just automatically going to be screened for cognitive impairment. It's not recommended to have that screening until something goes wrong. So until you're having increased falls, until you're either hyper or hypoglycemic, and most likely due to medication mismanagement or other anecdotal things like that. And so it really is in your best interest to pay attention and be honest with yourself when you're noticing that, hey, I got lost the other day on the way to work when I've driven this same route 20,000 times. And it's going to be those things, and you working with your family members to hold them accountable as well. That's going to be key for you to get early treatment, because what you don't want is to wait until something has already gone wrong to begin to seek for help. Mm-hmm. And another thing I want to highlight is that there's still, even though there is like this flow chart, and so the way they're going to treat your cognitive dysfunction is going to be the same way that they would treat your cognitive dysfunction with Alzheimer's disease. There still is no like targeted approach for treating cognitive dysfunction in diabetes and treating Alzheimer's in patients with type 2 diabetes. So this is really where the field of research needs to expand. And I want to kind of leave you guys with a couple stats that I found interesting. So according to the Alzheimer's Association, 1 in 5 Black Americans say that they would feel insulted if a doctor suggested an assessment for their thinking or memory. And that taking that attitude as your approach to aging and your approach to cognitive dysfunction is really detrimental for you, because you're going to lose out on having more years of having that cognitive function and having before your memory declines, because you're going to be able to get treatment early when you just kind of humble yourself a little bit and take what your doctor is saying and figure out a way to work with them, as opposed to taking it as a personal attack. Because Alzheimer's is not, it does not discriminate. It doesn't matter how smart you are or how active you are, even though being active does lower your risk for Alzheimer's disease. It can happen to anyone. And so thinking that it's not going to be me is only going to hurt you in the long run. And with that, I will be happy to take any questions that you all have for me.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. Wow. I just, like I said, I did not know, and I'm sure a lot of people don't know the relationship between the two. So this was extremely helpful. So if you have diabetes, what should you do about it? I know you said that they don't necessarily screen, until something goes wrong. I think, that's too late. So what should we be doing if you're diabetic and just so we can avoid, AD?
So one, really try to stay on top of your prescribed medication management plan, and really trying to do things to lower your blood glucose overall is always an excellent first step. And then two, again, just really paying attention when you notice that your cognitive capabilities are changing, and having that conversation with your doctor. And the worst thing that could happen is they say, oh, it's nothing. So
Mm-hmm.
it's always better to just have that conversation than to be sorry you didn't later on.
Right, right. And even if you're a caregiver, I mean, that's something you should be paying attention to as well. If it's your mom, or or a spouse, or is that something that you should bring up at during their doctor's appointment as well?
Absolutely. And as a caregiver, I mean, you spend more time with that person than anybody else, and you know that person probably more than anyone else. And so listen to your gut. Like if something's telling you, that didn't feel right, or something seems a little
Mm-hmm.
off, have that discussion. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I know it's difficult because you might think like you might offend them, and you don't want
Yeah.
to like overstep a boundary. But even if necessary, just like have a call their physician later on, maybe after the appointment, and say, "Hey, I noticed this." If you don't want
Right.
to feel like you're embarrassing them in that moment, but it's so
Right.
important to still have that conversation, um, so that person can get assessment for that.
Excellent, excellent. So there was a question in the chat, and that was, how do you die from Alzheimer's disease?
So um, the progression of Alzheimer's disease is, as I said, your neurons begin to die and you start losing your brain volume. And so, death from Alzheimer's disease usually doesn't actually come from just like dying of, I guess, Alzheimer's disease specifically. It usually will pass from things like failure to thrive, because a lot of Alzheimer's disease patients will refuse to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And also, your motor function is one of the things later on that will become affected. And so a lot of Alzheimer's patients become bedbound. And so you get things like aspiration pneumonia from laying down, either vomiting um, or coughing and aspirating bacteria into your lungs. And so those are usually the things that Alzheimer's disease patients die with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a friend of mine who actually has an organization for caregivers of folks who have dementia, and her parents both passed away, one from Alzheimer's and one from another form of dementia. And she said that her mother just literally forgot how to swallow. So that it's really it's growing though, isn't it? I mean, it just seems like more and more people are getting to a certain age, and actually even younger, who are actually contracting this disease.
Yeah, so it is growing, and they do anticipate the prevalence of Alzheimer's disease to continue to grow, even like through 2050 is like the latest projection.
Hmm.
So it's definitely something that we need to be aware about, and to also kind of be realistic with ourselves, with especially as caregivers, because I know it's really easy to let me get emotional. I know it's really easy to kind of be overly positive and just kind of push it off as, oh, isn't really happening.
Hmm.
And it's important to take care of yourself as a caregiver, as well as the person who you're caring for, because it's very easy to kind of lose yourself and lose, okay, how am I feeling about what's going on right
Hmm.
now, because you're
Right.
so oriented on, okay, I need to do this, I need to do that, I need to make sure this is done. And yeah, so I guess there's two sides of the coins. It's like, I feel like caregivers tend to either be kind of, oh, this isn't happening, or they'll kind of get stuck or lost in just the kind of being too realistic and kind of too just like, I need to do A, B, C, and D, and not really
Mm-hmm.
being in that moment.
Mm-hmm. Or realizing that's what's happening. That's what's the disease is causing some of the behavior changes, etc. I mean, even as a caregiver, there's so much to learn about what the person that you're caring for and what their needs are. I mean, like you said, it's progressive. And so, it may not be as bad, at first, but then it can easily get worse.
Yeah, and I think it's also important as a caregiver to kind of try to think about what that person is going through. It's like, what must it be like to know that you're forgetting, and
Mm-hmm.
really just not to take things that happen personally, because I mean, just as hard it is, like, to see a loved one going through it, just imagine what that would be like when you're going through it, or if it was
Mm-hmm.
you, and that has to be also
Mm-hmm.
so scary for them. And that's also why there is a large incidence of depression in patients with Alzheimer's
Mm-hmm.
disease, as well as
Mm-hmm.
caregivers. And
Sure.
so, talking to
Sure.
someone if you when you need it is so important, um, and seeking professional help if you need to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's so many support groups out there, and you definitely should definitely seek them out as soon as possible. Yeah, and there's so many ways, different ways, things that they can share with you to help you navigate, the situation. So, tell us a little bit about yourself in the sense that why did you decide to just, to to go in this direction to study diabetes and Alzheimer's?
Sure. So, as I kind of alluded to before, this kind of link between the two diseases is rather new. And so, in
Mm-hmm.
the lab that I joined, we've been looking at specifically in type 2 diabetes and cognitive dysfunction. But it was just really interesting to me, especially because both of these things are disproportionately seen in minority communities. And
Mm-hmm.
it's really something that I feel like should be talked about more. And I feel like if more people knew that, hey, this is a possibility, um, then more people would be able to see the changes early on and might lead to better outcomes in this minority population who currently doesn't feel that they're they can trust the medical profession as much
Sure.
as other people do.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a family who have both Alzheimer's disease and diabetes, like I'm sure a lot of you
Mm-hmm.
listening do. And as someone who wants to be a neurologist and who wants to study cognitive dysfunction, I mean, these are the patients that I'm going to see, and these are the patients that I'm going to be treating, and their family members who I'm going to be working with. And
Sure.
my goal is to do as much as I can for these patients. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, because of the therapeutics that are currently available, I'll be able to do a lot more sitting on a bench in a laboratory at the moment. In addition to my clinical care.
Yeah, I agree because I always think about it. It's like, it's great to have someone, a woman of color like yourself who is in this field, and because there's just too many people, especially in our community, who's dealing with both, one or the other or both, and we need your perspective on this. Sometimes that's what's necessary, and I don't know. It just feels like we're pushing a lot of medication, but not really finding a cure yet. I mean, are we
Yeah,
even close to a cure?
and I think a big part of that is we really need to work on diversifying medicine and diversifying the research field, because I'm one of those people that I look at the makeup of the participants in clinical studies. And
Mm-hmm.
even though,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, like black people are disproportionately affected by Alzheimer's disease, we never make up a large proportion of
Oh,
participants in clinical studies. And so it's like
yeah,
we're wondering, well, why aren't these treatments working for us? It's like they're not looking,
mhm.
they're not
Yeah, yeah,
they haven't been looking
and it goes back.
at our populations. What'd you
Right, and
say?
that goes back to that trust issue. Even
Yeah.
with the vaccine for COVID-19 and other things, we know that it's affecting us more than anyone else. But at the same time, history in the U.S. of healthcare and health experiment, just hasn't been on our side, and it's really tough because we do need to be a part of those trials.
Yeah, I completely understand that, and it is really hard to have that trust. But I mean, good news is like organizations like NIH and others are now really making a push to diversify the projects of the people that they sponsor, and have really
Go.
emphasized the importance of diversity in research.
Mm-hmm. It's huge. It's so huge. Let's see if we have anything from the chat here. I don't see any more questions. So if anyone
YouTube.
has any questions, oh, we have something on YouTube? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Can you read that for us, Mike? Because I can't see it, even though I put my glasses on.
How does one seek to help if they don't realize there's an issue?
How does one seek help if they don't realize there's an issue? Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
you were saying that earlier.
yeah. So it really just kind of takes being or trying to be as self-aware as possible, and
Mhm.
just don't let anything slide. If you see a pattern of things are happening and it doesn't feel right, just have a conversation with your physician about it. And it's hard sometimes to see when there are changes occurring in yourself, but we kind of need to also rely on our family members and our friends to be honest with us and say, hey, like you've been forgetting a lot of things lately, or hey, you seem kind of confused when I talked to you last week. Is everything going okay? And
Mhm.
if you're getting these conversations with your friends and your family, then I think you really need to take that and say, okay, I'm going to go speak to my physician about this, and listen to what others are trying to say to you.
Mhm. Absolutely. And then, you know, we need to be proactive. I mean, if your mother or your father had diabetes or had Alzheimer's disease or any other signs of dementia, etc., we got to be proactive. Even though you may not see yourself having all those symptoms, letting your doctor know your family history, and taking those proactive measures. I mean, it's just extremely important. So what? Oh, I see another question just popped up.
Are
Are
diabetes
diabetes?
and AD? Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh no, go ahead.
Are diabetes and AD genetic?
So, behind age, genetics is the second highest risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. And that's because well, in Black Americans, it's predominantly because of the inheritance of a gene called apolipoprotein 4. And every person gets two copies of this allele. And having one copy of this allele increases your risk of Alzheimer's disease by about 3 times. And then having both copies of this allele increases your risk of Alzheimer's disease between like 8 and 12 times. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get Alzheimer's disease, which is why the disease is so tricky to treat, because it really is. There's trends, but at the end of the day, they call it sporadic because it's really random. And so yeah, there's a genetic link, but it's not necessarily true that you're going to get it because you have a particular genetic allele. And then for diabetes as well, same type of thing. It's like family history increases your risk of having diabetes, but again, family history doesn't mean you're going to have diabetes. So, well, type 2 diabetes. So
Mhm.
again, genetics are linked, but genetics are not causal.
Gotcha. So if you are diabetic, I mean, in many cases, if you really start working on how you eat and exercising more, I mean, there's a way in which you can really reverse that. Is that a possibility with AD, with Alzheimer's disease?
So reversal, not really for reversal. However, for prevention, there have been studies that have shown that like increased physical activities and actually surprisingly having like strong social networks actually reduces your risk of Alzheimer's disease. And taking up hobbies later on in life, because I mean the age where Alzheimer's disease incidence starts increasing dramatically is 65. So most people are retiring and stuff like that. So you really need to keep your mind active and keep in touch with your family and try to really, like I said, keep those social ties strong, because that has been showing to reduce your risk. But once Alzheimer's disease has been diagnosed, there currently isn't anything that reverses it.
Gotcha. Well, that's interesting, because I mean, it is those interactions that you have with people that, that's natural, that's organic, that's important. And then also, I don't know, are those games and the puzzles and all that stuff, does it help?
So research evidence based wise, I wouldn't say that just like doing puzzles helps. However, staying mentally stimulated is helpful. So I wouldn't say that there's like one specific game or one specific puzzle that I would say, go play this and you'll never get Alzheimer's disease.
Gotcha.
However, continuing to do things that are mentally difficult for you is very important, and that has been shown to reduce your risk of Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah. And then I mean, just getting up and moving and exercising, and like you said, interacting with your family and friends and neighbors, and just so important. I mean, you just can't become, especially after you retire, it's just not good for your body to just stop and watch TV all day. You got to get out there and you got to keep moving. Absolutely. Yep.
And that physical activity is also good for type 2 diabetes. So killing two birds with one stone right there.
Right. Exactly. So that's the other thing is, pretty much, I was just thinking, the reversal of, how we can go about reversing type 2, but not necessarily Alzheimer's. So if you can get out there and be proactive with your type 2 diabetes, you might really reduce your risk altogether of the AD. And that's the beauty of it. So.
Yes, I mean, like I said before, having a really high blood sugar concentration is not good, because super high levels of glucose is going to actually kill your neurons, and neurons do not regenerate. So once you've killed it, it's dead. And so it's really important to try to have your type 2 diabetes in as good as control as possible, so that you're able to prevent more permanent damage. Because you do even see brain volume reductions in people with type 2 diabetes who haven't been diagnosed with dementia. So this is something that's still occurring even before full-blown Alzheimer's disease.
Gotcha. So what can caregivers do to continue a quality of life for someone who has Alzheimer's disease?
So continuing quality of life for the person that they're caring for, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I think one of the main things that a person who's caring for someone with Alzheimer's disease can do to help them is really to make sure that they're still interacting with other people, and to have conversations with those people who they're interacting with, and kind of let them know what to expect, or like where they are in the disease process, and really just kind of be patient with them and allow them to, even if they've already asked the same question a couple times, have that conversation again. Like what is that going to hurt you to do, to have the conversation again? What's it going to hurt you to do to watch this movie again, even though you watched it yesterday? And especially if it's something that they enjoy. And
Mhm.
you'll start to notice just the things that in the moment are making them happy and are meaningful. And
Mhm.
I think just trying to enjoy those short moments together um, is really important for you and for the person you're caring for.
I think that's absolutely right. Sometimes people get impatient, but
Hmm.
they know that a lot of this has to do with the disease itself. And so if, like you said, having that conversation again for the 50th time, so what? Just
Hmm.
make sure they're comfortable and happy. So that's extremely important. All right. Well, let's see if we have any more in the chat, and if we don't, then I'm just going to see if you have some maybe some final remarks and just to leave us out for today. Uh-oh, I see another question.
Yeah,
Mike,
we
you
got
want to
about
read
three
it for us?
more. Yeah, we got about three
Okay,
more.
good.
If you are diagnosed with prediabetes, is it best to contact a dietitian to help you manage your diet?
So I think that is something that would definitely be an excellent idea. I would definitely have a conversation too with your physician and see if there's someone that they recommend, because they might even have an idea of a dietitian that they would recommend. But changing your diet and exercising are going to be two things that are going to be crucial in order to reverse your elevation of your blood sugar levels.
And then can you speak on diabetes in children and teens?
Hmm.
Sure. So, usually when you think of diabetes in children and teenagers, you're thinking of type 1 diabetes, which is autoimmune disorder where your pancreatic, uh, the cells in your pancreas that make insulin, they're called beta cells. And so, in type 1 diabetes, your body is attacking and killing off those cells. So, you're no longer producing your own insulin, which is why patients with type 1 diabetes are usually treated with insulin. Whereas in type 2 diabetes, you have insulin, but your cells are just not recognizing it. So when we think of children, we're usually thinking about that type 1 diabetes autoimmune disorder. However, more and more, there's been an increase of type 2 diabetes seen in children and adolescents. And that's thought to be because there's a higher incidence of childhood obesity now. And so, again, having type 2 diabetes is going to increase your risk of having dementia at an earlier age. And you really don't want to start that process at an even younger age. And so
Wow.
it's really important to have that conversation and say, well, you don't necessarily have a dementia conversation, but having conversation with them about just the importance of like diet and exercise, and then doing it with them.
Mhm.
Be like lead by example and be their motivation and help them to bring their levels down so that they're not having to take medication for the rest of their life to manage their disease.
Wow. That is so important. And it's scary that you have so many people who are younger who are getting type 2 diabetes so early in life. So Mike, you have one more question?
Yes. Do you think that there'll be a cure for Alzheimer's?
I have faith that there will be. We just have to keep working at it. Um, Alzheimer's is just a really complicated disease and it affects everyone differently. And because it's so heterogeneous,
Mhm.
developing a cure is extremely difficult because there have been several therapeutics that have shown great promise in like animal models because you can create the exact same disease um, in an animal model. It's not like people where everyone looks different. Everyone's getting Alzheimer's at a different age. Everyone has other conditions in addition to their Alzheimer's disease. And so I think that it's definitely possible, but it's just going to take more clinical trials with a much larger array of different types of cases. And again, that's important of diversity in research.
Right, absolutely. So let me ask you this. Are there two questions? So are there more women of color like yourself who are in these that you know of personally who are working in the labs alongside of you, I hope?
So yes, the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, one of their chiefs is actually a woman of color. And so for me, that was really inspiring because I was just kind of going through NIH's page and like just looking at some of the people who work there, and they do have a lot of diversity, and just seeing that it's actually things are actually changing in a positive direction was just really encouraging for me. And then I also work with other physicians who are women of color and who have mentored me. And then also shout out to Mrs. Lucretia Long, if she's out in the audience. I had the pleasure of working with her at the Ohio State Department of Neurology doing research there. And so there's definitely women of color in research, and it's definitely not the same research field that it was 20, 30 years ago.
Excellent. That's so encouraging to me. And so my second question was, so what would you tell someone who's a young woman who's in high school, or young man in high school? What should they do if they're interested in getting into this field?
Believe in yourself. That's be my number one, because I mean, I was told in undergrad that by actually a advisor that I should change my major, should not do neuroscience. And had I internalized that and quit, I wouldn't be where I'm at. And then don't let no be the end of it. I didn't get accepted to the PhD program the first time I applied, and so I applied again and I got in. And I think that's so important to just don't give up. And
Exactly.
no matter where you're currently at, you can always turn your situation around and get where you want to be if you want it.
Excellent. Excellent. Oh, seriously. I mean, that's what people need to know. It's all about your resilience and being able to believe in yourself, and your self-confidence is so huge, and if you don't believe in yourself, I believe in you. So
Yep.
we believe in you. Absolutely. So you just got to push forward. All right. Mike's
Reach
putting
out
up
and find
two
mentors.
We got two more questions for you.
Go for it.
What would you
Go
do
ahead,
to
Mike.
ensure that individuals who won't step in and scam us, take our money, and find themselves with disabilities?
So, are you meaning like for like in like a research aspect, or just in like in a care aspect?
I think in a cure aspect. I'm not sure what he means.
Care aspect. Okay. Well, again, I would kind of say like get references. There an abundance of care groups that are on like any social media platform that you're on. There's an abundance of groups of caregivers that will that meet and talk about whatever diseases the person that they have that they're caring for has, and try to get recommendations from other people. I'm There's also a website. I believe it's just care.com. I texted it to you. I'll make sure I get it in the chat before we leave.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And that website also has a lot of resources for caregivers. And I would just, if someone's reaching out to you to say, hey, I have this service, I would be very wary of them. I would always try to get either a recommendation from your doctor, or see if you have friends or family or people who are on these forums, or a place that has a lot of testimonials, to see what care facilities are actually good. And then always go and visit them for yourself before entrusting your loved one with them.
And you did text those to me, and I'm putting them in the chat right now. So if anyone needs to follow these links, here they come. Oh, now I'm going back. So that's extremely helpful. You have another question, Mike?
If for teens with type 2 diabetes and depression, is metformin good to treat them with? If I said that right.
So I would
Oh,
definitely make
metformin.
sure. Mhm.
That's
So
metformin.
metformin it is usually the kind of first line drug for treating type 2 diabetes just because it's inexpensive, it's well studied, and it's effective. I would definitely have a conversation with your child's pediatrician about their comorbidity of also having depression, and especially if they're on medications for that depression, to make sure that there's no interaction between um, the two of those drugs.
Excellent. Is that it, Mike? All the questions from the YouTube? Mike, is that all the questions from the YouTube? I guess he can't hear me.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, then it's all of them.
Oh, okay. Excellent. So let's go ahead and wrap up. Do you have any final words for us, Jeanae?
Yeah. So just thank you all for hanging in and listening to my talk. And if there are any young high schoolers or undergraduates out there who want some advice or want someone to encourage them, please reach out to me. My email is shelby.12@wright.edu. Shoot me an email. I promise I won't bite. And I would love to hear from you.
I love that. That's excellent. And we need to all do more of that. Reach out to and truly encourage you all to reach out to her. She's offering it, so talk to her because that's how we get from point A to point B is helping each other out and being supportive. This was really great information. I'm going to tell you, I have not heard of many people talking about the relationship between um, type 2 diabetes and Alzheimer's disease. And so I really appreciate you sharing this information with us tonight, Jeanae. This has been great. And I also appreciate you sharing with how you were inspired by other women of color who are in your field. And seriously, we need more and more of us in the STEM, in the definitely, yep, in the medical fields to help the rest of our community. So we appreciate you so
Yeah.
much. Thank you all for joining us tonight. This was a great discussion. Have a wonderful week. And as I always say, stay safe and stay healthy. Good night.
Good night.